Welcome to another session of our podcast called Radical Grace in the Economy. It is based on a workbook I've been working on called Radical Grace in the Economy, which is online at radicalgrace.ca. I'm Gary Russell we're all from Canada. I'm Gary Russell from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. I used to teach economics, and I've been trying to change the direction of economic conversations with this workbook, and I've been trying to find people who would like to talk about it. And we found one today, a good friend of mine. But first, Jyoti is the co-host. I'll let you introduce yourself before we get to Eric.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Gary. My name is Jody Knoll, and I'm a parish priest, a member of the Franciscan Order, and I'm not an economist, but I live in the world, and Gary says that's all you need to be a part of this. So I'm here. I'm interested in I'm interested in how we live in the world. So I've been curious as to how these conversations may unfold. But thank you, Gary, for inviting me to be a part of this.
You're welcome. You're a valuable part of the team here. Now, Jyoti and our guest Eric are both from Newfoundland, and I'm from Winnipeg. So
I'm still here. I'm not from. I'm
from
as it was
you're
in the
there.
beginning, it is now,
Okay.
and ever shall be.
In the importance of the nuance of words there.
Oh yeah.
I guess I have to learn that. Now, Eric Parsons is a friend of mine for 30 years or so. He is right now deacon at St. Margaret's Anglican Church in Winnipeg, and I've been at that church since 1997. And we've collaborated a lot together in a whole lot of things. One of them was that to become a Franciscan, an Anglican Franciscan, I had to be a novice for 2 years. And I had to choose someone to be my spiritual director for those 2 years. That person didn't have to be a Franciscan to perform that role. So I asked Eric, and Eric kindly volunteered. And I'm quite grateful that Eric stuck with me for the whole 2 years. And I finally got professed to the order. And so I'm quite happy to have him as a guest on our program. So Eric, welcome. Tell us a little about yourself.
Well, I just want to say I was at your confession to become a Franciscan down in Carmen during the COVID crisis, right? Right in the
That's
middle of
right.
COVID, we were all sitting around with 20 feet apart and watching you get your orders, and another one in Port of Prairie. So it's been a ride for me as well, Gary. I've
Oh
enjoyed
yeah.
being a part of your spiritual development. And as I keep telling him now, Josiah, that he's a Christian now, Gary is. So he approaches life from a Christian perspective. But I was a dentist as a career. I'm retired now. I spend a day a week working with students, which is very rewarding. And in my dental career, I moved around a fair amount. So I'm not the typical, 6 foot by 8 foot uh, enclosure that dentists live in most of their lives. So I ended up in Manitoba. I ended up deciding to study theology, and I ended up with a master's of theology, another placement, as my friends say, and then my minister asked me to become a deacon.
Yeah, so you're one of the deacons in my church, as a matter of fact. Yeah. Now, our topic. It's a big one. Actually, you sent me an email saying this is 38 pages. What am I supposed to talk about? And I suggested choose one or two of the topics. Now, the topics, I have them on my other screen, are about what's wrong with our economic culture, the wrong emphases we have in our secular economic culture. And it's expressed in terms of all of the things that economics denies. It starts with denial of grace. There's no space for grace in economic culture. Denial of vocation because we're all consumers, and that's the only thing we do. That's many of us don't have a calling in life at all. Denial of community, denial of abundance, and then number 5, denial of the individual. You said that's one you might like to talk about, the role of the individual in our culture, the role of the individual in our church. And you've also, well, we have had a discussion group. I'm in a discussion group with Eric about Rowan Williams' book, Looking East in Winter. And I think that's where you would want to start talking about the role of the individual in society and in culture. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, we could start there, sure. It struck me that we are never satisfied, or only a few of us are. So why is it that we never, as our preacher once said, how much do you need? Just a little bit more. And that's the way we run our lives. You get so much, you want more. So why is it we deny even inside of ourselves? Even good works now are considered to be good for your resume. Go overseas and volunteer in the Corps for a year, and it looks good on your resume. It's got nothing to do with the fact that it's something that's good for you and good to do. We have commodified and we have turned everything into economics. Always an economics stand to it. And I've often wondered why. I sort of didn't do it part of most of my life. So as a result, I'm not very rich. But, I said to a student yesterday, I said, I only had one dental student yesterday. So I said to her as she left, I said, stop, don't become a dentist, stay yourself. And so we have these expectations you have to meet if uh, schools of culturize you rather than educate you. You have to learn the culture of the priest, be a priest. You have to learn the culture of the dentist or the cultures of the lawyers in order to be a part of the group. And not you don't see a lot of you see a few lawyers maybe that are standing up for civil rights, but most lawyers become part of the law community. Most dentists become part of the dental community. How much money did you make? You can send in your money, how much you make every year, and they'll tell you which percentile you're in, whether you're in the top 3 percentiles or the bottom 5 percentiles. It's all about competition and being better than the other person. They're making more.
So why did that happen, Eric? Why do we commodify everything?
I think it's because someone else takes the responsibility. I was just listening to chocolate, right? Chocolate is a big thing before Easter because of the lack of chocolate, right? So they talked about there are brokers that buy the chocolate and turn it into a commodity. You go to the farmer and say, I'll give you so much, and you try to estimate, and then if you can sometimes make big money if the price goes up. And so, by commodifying everything, you can turn it into a money making, and then we can get a bigger Apple phone or whatever it is we want. What the current?
So is that because we are? Is that because we're holding up the importance of an individualistic society? Do you think?
Yeah, I think we have become hyper individualized. And the book we're reading right now, Gary, she doesn't like the Protestants because the Protestants are not too much see good works as something you need to do as opposed to something that comes from inside of you. So you become a Christian, you say, as a Christian now, I should go overseas, I should do this. And then you start to do it, and you start to do it more as a work than as an outflowing of the grace that God put into your life when you became Christian or
So what we're talking about, Eric, really is what does it mean to be a person, to be human?
well, and to be accepted for the human you are. I mean, in our multicultural society now, we do have to learn to accept people where they are, but we're all part of the same family of God, and we all have that spark in us that is not happy, is not satisfied. And you can go right through the major theologians and you see them all, right? St. Augustine had the conversion experience. You go to John Wesley. John Wesley's heart was warmed by the Bible study he went to, and you see over and over again people recognizing that there's within them there's a spark of eternal life. There's a spark of God, and of course there's the other spark too, is the as the Eastern theologians say, there's also the spark of the Diablo that comes searching for you, trying to get you to do.
Now, part of the background of Jody's question was, as in this modern society, it is perfectly legitimate to look out for number one. No, I'm thinking of a popular song, right? Looking out for number one. Everybody sings along with that. It's perfectly legitimate to look out for only number one in our society. And it's a little suspect. You'll be accused of being a socialist if you're too much focused on the community and serving the community. But I think part of Jody's question was, if we're in this state of looking out for number one is perfectly okay, how did we get here? Why does everybody think that's okay?
Because we're trying to subsume the spiritual part of our life. We figure we're going to be happy if we acquire the next thing. And why do we want to be happy? You know, somebody during the Russian Revolution, somebody asked one of the Russian Christians, "Does Christianity make you happy?" Being a Christian is not about being happy; it's about service, right? And then we don't talk about the fact that the one who acquires also suffers, right? Like, have you ever looked around the world and who did? I went to Haiti, and they were scared to let us get out of their sight because they figured somebody would come along and kidnap us and have us up for ransom, right? And over again, you see rich people are behind glass walls, they're behind fenced-in communities. To what? To hang on to the wealth that supposedly will make them happy, but it doesn't make them happy, and it doesn't make them safe either. Although they're safer than I am.
So have we come to think that the more we have, the happier we'll be?
Well, there's the expression, he who has the most toys when he dies wins. Are you familiar with that?
Now, one of the other topics that we're branching into, it's always impossible to keep these topics separate, is the fact that we are a hardcore consumer society, consumerism. And economics is right in there. Economics says the purpose of life is to get the maximum possible satisfaction from your consumption. And that's the only reason you work. So we have a society which, to a large extent, I shouldn't be absolute about it, but to a large extent, legitimizes only maximizing consumption. So part of my question earlier was, how did we get to that? But another question arises from that. What's the alternative to that? The purpose of life is to maximize consumption. What's the alternative to that?
Well, but you see, Gary, what you say is only partially true. Because they say if you look on the globe, that all of the richest countries are cold countries. And the reason they're rich is because you have, if you go to Barbados, so long as you keep the rain off for a couple of months of the year, you can live in peace with the simplest little dwelling, right? Whereas you can't do that in Russia or North America, Canada. You have to consume a certain amount. The trouble occurs is when we want to overconsume. And we have to always be expanding, which I just don't. I mean, the population of Japan is declining, population of China is declining, and people say, "Oh, it's terrible, it's terrible." How can they sustain their economy if they're? So I think there is a certain level needed for us to sustain an economy. The question is deciding where, what is enough. And you live in an hyper-individualistic society, like Josiah said, you decide for yourself what's enough, and you keep going until you get more and more and more.
Now, in one of our earlier conversations last time we met, you were making some distinction about needs, and that fits in right with what you're saying, that we need to consume in order to stay alive to a certain extent. But there comes a point when you don't need more consumption anymore. And then what are you supposed to do with your life? And you were frustrating me a bit because I was trying to get to the point that the alternative to a life of consuming is a life of a vocation. The alternative to a consumer society is a vocational society where everyone has a calling and they're spending their life trying to meet that calling, to do the good that that calling calls for. Where should I go with that? Does everybody have a calling?
Well, I think a lot of people spend a lot of time denying their calling. I think that's actually one of the problems. You know, you're really good as a daycare worker, but they don't pay you anything, hardly enough to make a living. So you it's very hard to follow your calling if they don't give you enough money to live on. So you have to have a figure out another way to make money.
And if your calling is to be a parent, you get very little money for that.
Yeah, and they grow up to be teenagers besides that.
So, Judy, what's your calling?
I think that spending time to figure out, without using religious words, spending time to figure out who you are in relation to the Creator can be very distracting. While it can be very fulfilling and nurturing and encouraging, it can also be challenging and downright distracting. It can be one of the most dangerous things you'll ever do. And I think most people avoid it in any way. So people are not into trying to discover their true self. They would rather deal with the false self that's only interested in the outward appearances, the consumption of things, so that individuals are defined in that way because it's a lot easier to do that. It's less challenging, it's less threatening, but it's also less satisfying. And advertisers prey on that and lead people to think much is better, more is the best, most is the best. And so people are always in search of that. And since most people will never get to that point, we'll always be consuming. We'll always be consuming and and wanting more. I mean, it's the nature of our culture, isn't it?
That's the complaint, the nature of our culture. Eric, you look like you're going to say something.
I remember in a story about somebody they were from Poland or somewhere. They were visiting Winnipeg and they saw the big shopping malls and so they went inside and it was full of stuff. They said, we have big shopping malls like that in Eastern Europe, but there's nothing in them. And so there is some kind of a middle ground here that we need to, if there's no incentive at all to work, lots of people will just simply not work. If there's no value in your work, you're not going to work either. And if what you're producing in your work is just junk, there's not much motivation to work there either. So there has to be some incentive to work. The question is when we take it too far. We've taken it so far now that there are people that are investing their money overnight for 10 or 12 hours to get a little 1/10 of 1% on their money. It's all about the usury and all about the money. So what are they going to do with that, extra $20,000 they made overnight? Reinvest it the next night. And it has no, there's no, what word am I looking for? There's no pleasure in that. And so if there's no pleasure in that, then if I'm going to do this lousy job, I'm going to get paid for it. And if I get paid for it, I'm going to enjoy my life outside my job.
So you're talking about people whose job is not their calling. Their job is something they don't want to do, so they have to be paid to do it, and they have to be compensated by having a lot of stuff to consume because they're not doing what they want to do with their life. I'm wondering to what extent most of our society, most of the people in our society don't have a calling in life. So what's left for them but to make money and be a consumer? Am I oversimplifying?
Well, I mean, most people, your father was a fisherman before you, right? That's the Newfoundland song goes. Your father was a fisherman before you. So you're a fisherman. You're a fisherman because your father was a fisherman. But it doesn't mean that even though the work is hard and dreary, that you cannot feel a sense of pride because you're producing food for people. You know, a lot of the fishermen are very careful with the way they fish to take care of the environment. So they can feel pride even though they may not feel it's a calling. It can become a calling. If what you do is of value, and if what you do is good for people, it's a calling. The average churchgoer you see every day is probably fairly rich. You just don't walk around downtown and see the homeless people high on drugs and sleeping in the corner of the building. That's not where we are.
My previous question was, how did we get here? But I'm trying to suggest part of how we got here is that not enough people are like these fishermen that you're talking about, whose job is their calling to provide food for people. And they're proud of performing that role. And I'm complaining that there's so few people like that. But Jody looks like he has something to say.
Well, I just think that if you have an individualized attitude about what it means to be a person, that you can easily be caught up in a consumerist society because you don't see value in having relationships with other people. And if we've come to the point that these are secondary and tertiary, and the individual is primary, then I can see why our culture is functioning the way it is. I can see why we've come the way we've come, because we have disconnected ourselves from any wider sense of community. And I don't know if the economy has done that. The economy may have contributed to it, but it wasn't just the economy, because we were pushing towards education. We were pushing towards, we built universities in Canada. People were encouraged to finish school. People were given the right to vote. People were given credit. You're given credits. You can have now and pay over a lifetime. Well, all of that leads to a form of individualism that is difficult it's difficult to reach with an alternative.
It's a form of liberation too, though, Josiah, because I made an ideal description of the fishermen. Most fishermen were caught having to serve the Crosby family and never having quite enough money at the end of the year to pay their bills and having to come back again, or their fish was bought under value by a firm and then turned into a commodity, which was then sold to some other country. And I had a brother-in-law that was a fisherman, and he was proud of the fact that he was out on the seals. He was also a sealer, and he could do those kind of work. But he just barely made enough money to live, and many people died because it became, it no longer became work. It became paying the merchants for what you owed, and that's life destroying.
But since the Second World War, we've had a boom in education and immigration, settling the West, Manitoba and the West. I mean, in settling, in building large farms, in farm machinery, and in the acquiring of credit has led to a desire. It led to a desire to accumulate a certain minimum, and that minimum was raised as farmers became wealthier and could get more. They got more education. But what it also did was that it helped an individualistic attitude towards life. And it happened all across Canada, not just, in Newland, but all across Canada.
All
And,
across
and
the
what we
world.
have today is a society in despair because we're rich beyond our wildest dreams, and yet we're unhappy. We have, a lot of people who are suffering from mental illness and so forth, and we have people who are unhappy and disoriented. And I just think there's a lot of unhappiness today. Part of that, I think, is the individualness, which leads to a disconnect of what we're really meant to be as humans.
I want to suggest again, I sort of touched on this point earlier, that it's a matter of needs versus wants. And in early society in Canada and many other countries still, you have to strive for more. A lot of people in the world don't have enough. And more is legitimate because they're hungry. But there comes a point where you've got all the things you really need and you got to stop wanting more. And that's where I'm saying now we have to shift to an economy that focuses on what am I doing in life? What is my calling? What is God calling me to do? And I'm suggesting that means at some point you got to turn a corner from satisfying your needs. Okay, you've got them satisfied. Now you got to turn a corner, not trying to get more stuff anymore. And as Franciscans, Jyoti and I are used to the idea from the Franciscan order that beyond the point of being hungry and having needs, beyond that point, we should be what we call self-denial. Part of the rule of life of the Franciscans is self-denial, that once you have your basic needs met, then your greater satisfaction comes from having less, not having more. That is so alien to our society.
Farmers are maybe not a great example because farms have now become huge industrial complexes. And in lots of cases, they use all kinds of pesticides and herbicides and everything else that's very bad for the soil, for the earth, but makes higher yields. Now, I was telling my wife a bit about this today. And I said, what we need communities that stand in stark opposite to what we see in the culture. In the early church, they had the desert fathers, right? The desert fathers basically went in the desert, out into the desert, built themselves. But one guy lived in a tree for a year or something, right? And built themselves rooms. And every time culture looked at them, they saw the alternative. We don't have that in our culture. In the farming, we do a bit with the Otterites. The Otterites are not necessarily good for the earth, but they do live in communal, and everybody gets food, and everybody gets looked after, and everybody gets the house. The community looks after the community. So they're to a certain extent. The trouble with the Otterites is they lose a lot of their individual autonomy when they have to dress the same, all this kind of stuff. So we don't like that a lot, but we need communities, and the Franciscans could be one of those that stand in stark opposition to what the culture sees around them. And I know you struggled a lot with that, Gary, when you were becoming a Franciscan, right? That do I
Oh, yeah, that was a struggle. Just for people who don't know, there's the novice period in which I'm supposed to be reporting to my formation counselor how I'm doing with my rule. And for example, one part of my rule was self-denial. I committed to deny myself some of the superfluous things of life, the excess baggage that I don't really need. And Eric will recall that I was often complaining that I'm not doing very well in this.
Josiah, from your perspective, you as a Franciscan and as a priest, when you stand in the pulpit on certain Sundays, do you ever tell them that what it is that the Franciscans offers to the culture that they might like and want?
No, because the main goal of the Franciscans is to make Christ known. So when I'm in the pulpit, I spend all my time making Christ known to them. Do I ever give examples of how my rule of life affects how I live? Yes. Yes, I do. For example, right now I'm candidate for creation care. So in a most recent publication of our quarterly newsletter called New Leaf, I talked about what I go through before I purchase an item of clothing, because as I purchase an item of clothing, I give away two of what I have. So if I buy a new coat, I give away two coats. If I'm buying a pair of pants or a sweater, I'm giving away two pairs of pants and two sweaters, because what it does is it reduces my closet size because I have too much clothes, but it also makes me self-conscious of, do I really need this item I'm going to buy, and what items do I have in my closet now can I give away? So in that way, indirectly, yes. But the primary goal of the Franciscan order is to make Christ known, not Francis, but Christ.
One question for you, Jody. if when you buy a new coat, you give away two, who do you give them to?
One of the coats.
I give them to charity where they're given away to church charity.
Hmm.
We have a clothing, the church sponsors two or three food banks and charity banks and that sort of thing. So I give them away to charity banks because I don't know individuals themselves who need them. And I mean, if I did, I'd give it to them. So I give them to charity banks.
Hmm. So you're not just denying yourself, you're doing it to do good for other people. Go ahead.
Yeah. So in trying to determine needs from wants and to be self-conscious with each purchase, that's where my Franciscan order, because the rule of life, you write yourself for yourself. So eventually I'm going to have to stop doing that because I'll need to keep a certain amount of clothes. But I mean, I just possess a lot of clothes for some reason. And this enables me to really think through if I need something before I purchase it. And I'm not saying other people should do this. I'm just saying what I do as part of a discipline for consumerism, because our winter theme for our own creation care program in the diocese was on consumerism. So I use that example when I wrote the article. You know, a couple of us write articles for the diocesan publication. But but to your point, I asked the question. A question I'd like to ask you is: are we in a position as a church? Are we in a position as a church to point and live a better way?
Deacon Eric, what do you think?
The church has the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. And I don't remember which is which, but one looks after the needs, the physical needs of the congregation, and one looks after the spiritual needs of the congregation. I personally think that the church should be governed in such a way the bishops and priests are given the time to serve the spiritual needs of their congregations. Then you go down one to deacons and lay people, and they're the ones that then should be doing the part of the physical needs of the congregation. But I tell many of my priest friends that their problem is that they're still trying to be a deacon. I said, you can go to the food bank and you can bless the sandwich that are being offered, but you should not be the one that offers them. You're the one that's doing the spiritual part of your job, and someone else comes behind and makes sure that is carried out. The two working together works really, really well. But but we within the church we often don't look after our own, and if we don't look after our own, as we lose them one by one, they don't come back because they don't see that well, they don't see themselves as valuable. I guess is what I could say in terms of roles they play. Am I fair in saying that?
Well, that's certainly what you're saying is fair, but I wonder if you limit yourself to that. Don't you go visit people in hospitals, say, not for their material needs, but precisely for their spiritual needs, that they need a deacon to talk to about how they're coping with this hospital, or is that something the priest should be doing?
No. I think lay people can do it personally, as long as they get some training. And we're all prophets, priests, and kings. Isn't that what the Bible says? And
This says a whole lot of stuff, Eric.
yes, that's true enough. But
I
I see
yeah,
many priests that burn themselves out because they try to do too much, and I think it's a shame.
I'm still wondering though if the church can provide cutting edge example for what it means to be in community.
Well, I think we are getting more and more to that where we're seeing that less and less, more and more is falling on the fewer and fewer, and government cuts back. I mean, pretty soon the churches will all we have left to cater to people's needs because there's many cutbacks going on, and I mean, Winnipeg is a disaster when it comes to people's needs.
The church used to be the primary provider of care before the government got into the game. Should we get back to that?
Do you know right now in Nova Scotia, there are 25 doctors that are thinking about quitting because the government is going to force them to refer to the maid. And that's the culture. When the government starts to run everything, that's what happens. Somebody has the power and somebody exercises it. So the more the church does, the better. I mean, the church can get their money from the government. It's not a problem. But they're the ones that control it. And once the government controls it, a friend of mine said, we should get the church to make a donation to the lottery fund to the church. And when they come to make a donation, we should say, we're not taking it because it's been garnered through betting. And that's true. That's a good idea or not. But it's hard to separate the two out. I mean, you put your money in the bank and the bank used the money to do whatever. You have no control, right? And Jody doesn't like this stuff.
Oh, okay. Do you have something on that, Jody? 'Cause I was going to ask something else. So you,
I'm still wondering if the church, if we as Christians can actually, we did a survey last year with the Creation Care, and we in the survey we asked questions to people about how they respond to good stewardship challenges, in society and culture. And most people do not look to the church to be good stewards. Most people do not look to the church for leadership in creation care because they think the church is not a good steward and is not a good steward of creation care. One example is that we have great big buildings with tiny congregations in them that we don't need those great big buildings. So we can hardly point to good use of time and space and resources. Another one is how we use our resources. And Eric was beginning to allude to that when he talked about the use of human resources and how we have a clash of roles with our human resources. But I'm wondering if the church we have today in Canada is actually equipped to help people understand how important it is to be in community.
Yeah, I think you're being a little unkind about the large churches because we had several large churches in Winnipeg, right? And they're all in the same area downtown, and one of them was converted to housing. But when they were built, they were full. So are you going to say we cannot build a big church and fill it up because the next generation won't need it, or the next generation will move to the suburbs? Nobody could have known that all these people were going to move out of downtown Winnipeg. But we do need worship space. And when God built the temple, God made the temple beautiful and large and wonderful. And he still told people when the orphan and the widow comes to your door, or when the refugee comes to your country, you look after them.
and one of the things you said to me in a previous conversation, Eric, is we shouldn't be closing down too many churches because people are going to want to come back at some place, and we have to have a place for them to worship.
Josie, you got one of the best jobs you can have because when our culture fails people, they're going to turn to you. And it will fail people. It's
Oh,
guaranteed.
no, I'm sorry. Our culture is already failing people and they are not turning to us.
Ooh.
They are turning to clinicians. They're turning to the Canadian government to solve their problems. They are not turning to the churches. Sorry, my friend. They are not doing that.
I hear you. I hear you. I've said recently that an issue first is theologized. It's the church that gives the issue what it is, whether it's good or bad. Then it becomes medicalized. And so, well, let's maybe take alcohol. People say, "Oh, you're an alcoholic. You're drunk. You should be going to church and getting your life straightened out." Then they say, "Oh, no. Alcohol is a disease. You need to figure out how to cure the disease." And then it becomes normalized. It becomes part of the culture. But now we have a backlash, from our culture.
Jody, do you preach to your congregation about the virtues of being minimalist, being frugal, and taking only what you need?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They're probably sick of hearing that. I don't preach of something if I can't practice it. And it takes me a while sometimes to figure out what I can actually practice. So there's lots of topics I don't touch because I haven't dealt with the discipline myself to preach about that. So there's lots of things that I don't preach about. In terms of our consumer world and community, we have a ministry model in our parish, and community is the second focus of that model. The first being prayer, the second being community, and the third being missional action. And in focusing on community, I really think the church has to work at showing the value of community today. We have to work at that.
And you do, and so does Eric. I
Well,
mean,
that's a big thing in our church now. When I joined our church 35 years ago or whatever, there were no old people. Now we have that generation is now 35 years older. So if they were 40, they're now 75 or whatever, right? And so we have a large continuum. We have two churches basically, a church of old people and church of young people. And I think community is going to be the key, like absolutely key. If in order to make this thing last, we have to form a community where the adults are taught, the children are taught the ways of the faith, and if it doesn't happen, it'll last a generation, and then it will
mhm.
fade away.
Well, I think our church, I mean, I've been around it not quite as long as you, but been around it long enough. I think our church has been pretty successful into making ourselves a community and has been pretty successful in getting the young people, young generation and the old generation talking to each other. So I think we're a success story. Jody, is your parish a community?
But yes, we're a community of old people, seniors. Very strong
See,
community. We had an ACW meeting 2 weeks ago. There were 32 women there. We had an ACW quiet day at the beginning of Lent, and there were 62 women there. Like we have strong community, but we're seniors. I'm not, but the community are seniors, and it's strong and it's vibrant. We just did a collection for the Gathering Place. The Gathering Place is a program that's run in downtown St. John's for homeless people. And so we just done a program in Lent for collecting things for the Gathering Place: shampoo, soaps, deodorant, coffee, that kind of thing, to give to them, to give out to people. So we're not in the downtown St. John's, but we had a Lenten project for that outreach ministry that happens in downtown St. John's. So we understand where we are and where needs are, but I just wonder if the church can be a light to show the true meaning of community and how that works. And I haven't seen that in very many places. I'm not saying we're doing it successfully, but I'm saying we are a community. But we have a lot of young people who are not part of the institution of our community because they're not in. We have a lot of young people who are not in a community. The communities they're in are informal things,
so Eric,
gatherings, and
uh,
I was going to compliment Jody on the fact that prayer was number one. Someone recently asked me why St. Margaret's was so successful, and I said the reason was because of prayer. Like Sunday evening service was prayed into existence, and now there's 2 or 3 prayer meetings that go on at different times over Zoom, and we can do what we like, and may or may not be successful. But if we simply tell God, God, you've got no other choice, you've got to do something here. He might close you down, so you be prepared. But the odds are people will be brought into, and then will they find a place? I mean, even at St. Margaret's, when my son was there as a young, just college student, I guess, he was talking about leaving St. Margaret's because there were no young people. But another couple came, another couple came. Suddenly they had 6. 6 was all they needed. From there on in, it just increased.
okay, we're reaching the amount of time we should take. Let me end with one thing that is relevant to all we've been talking about. Our church, St. Margaret's has been successful in raising up a generation of young people who are sticking with the church. And we've also been successful in getting the younger generation and the older generation talking to each other successfully and productively. I think not many churches pull that off. Do you have any comment, Eric, about why we've been so successful at that? What have we been doing right?
Well, like I was telling you, I mean, when a couple comes in, you make them welcome, and I'm sure Jody knows all of this stuff, right? And like the Baptists, you get one, keep it. You know? And how do they do it? They get one, they keep one. They get 2, they keep 2. I don't know. I'm not trying to tell you how to run your church.
Yeah.
People have to be challenged, I think, like,
Well, there's that too, yeah, and we do challenge them.
but we have terrible music in our church, right? The music is terrible. And all old, it's not 1,000 years old. We don't sing it, right? Basically, most of it. And yet, because people want to be part of the community, people don't complain. I don't complain very much, except off and on.
Very much want to thank you, Eric, for being here because I knew you would make a valuable discussant on this kind of thing.
So,
Think that,
Jody, what I actually said was, and Gary only half quoted me, was we cannot close the churches because there will be a revival. And when the revival comes, we're going to need the space for those people coming to the church. And if you look at the history, I mean, I talk about the time of John Wesley. Nobody went to church when John Wesley came on the scene. Nobody. Like the churches were, I mean, he was able to turn the culture around completely. When they say why, that's why England never had the revolution, because Wesley converted everybody and they didn't want to kill people anymore. And I think we pray to the Lord for the people to go into the harvest, right? For the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few.
It's
Jordy,
been
I
great
have a
chatting with you.
son. I have a son who was a priest, and a wife who was a priest. And I see what churches can do to people. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. So I hope you are able to pray to God that you will not be
burnt out.
stamped on. Stamped on.
Oh, that doesn't bother me.
When you, pardon?
That doesn't bother me. I've been at this now 37 years.
When you read
Uh,
when you get the National Church Anglican Journal for April, there's a story in there on a guy that's a priest that's been taken to court for unseemly behavior. And he was also an organist. He served as an organist in my son's church. And he said two malicious men in his church that's tearing the place apart. Like,
Yeah,
yes,
it's
I read a book by Lloyd Rediger years ago called Clergy Killers. Clergy Killers by Lloyd Rediger. And it was an interesting book.
now I've heard of a few. There was a guy circling around for a while, apparently. You'd go into churches and start doing things and get the churches divided.
yeah, I've heard of that. And I thank you too, Jody,
If we're
for
enjoying ourselves so much, Gary, we don't want to say goodbye.
well, I
As for my friend in Newfoundland, you know the joke, right? It says, in Newfoundland, you're going to get an extra half an hour when the world ends.
and Jody, I was starting to say I thank you for continuing to work with me as a
My
co-host.
pleasure. I look forward to it. Yep.
Yeah,
Look forward to the next one.
so we'll have to have a talk about who the next one will be. We haven't lined anyone
Oh,
up yet,
absolutely. Yep.
but
Yep.
we'll
We
work
have a
on
list.
that.
Want me to find somebody for you? I'll find somebody for you.
Oh, sure, because I've been having some trouble. People saying, "Oh, that's a great idea," but when you ask them to actually do it, they're afraid to do it.
It's all about the editing.
People are not afraid of me. Maybe
It's
people
the
are so
editing.
afraid of me they don't want to say no.
Maybe that's it.
It's all in the editing, Gary. When you edit it, you can make it look good.
I don't think I'm going to have to edit much here. Anyway, Jody, would you like to pray us out?
Blessing.
Almighty and everlasting God, we give you thanks for the celebration of Easter, for the celebrating the joy of the resurrection during this time. We give you thanks for Eric and his ministry, for Gary and his ministry. And we pray that these blessings may be a part of your unfolding kingdom, and all done for the good of the unfolding of your kingdom in this time and place. We pray this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Alleluia.
Amen.